my many sins, I'm excused one. I've never been into self-hype, self-promotion, or grandiosity. But I'm going to make an exception in the case of Tripping with the Alchemist, a 10,000-word essay published in the June '03 issue of the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, with not only the encouragement but the insistence of Gordon Van Gelder, who wanted this story told. I wanted to tell this story. Scott died on February 11th, 1993. Somebody at the agency, I was there continuously for 20 years, from 81 to 01, said, "Barry, you've got to tell this story, the chaos of the agency in the wake of his death." I said, "I am going to tell this story, but a few people have to die." Thanks to Gordon, I got this done. I got this essay done, and David's wife said, and I read it online, so you can't deny it, that this will probably infuriate Barry, but I think it's the best thing he's ever done. And maybe the only thing he's ever done. I have to live with that.
I should add, the reason I pushed so hard to get you to write it, when I was still at St. Martin's, somewhere in the late 90s, the single best pitch for a book I ever got, best one-line pitch, was from Barry. It was going to be for an entire book in the Scott Meredith agency. And the pitch was, this book will be a history of everything that has gone wrong in publishing in the last 50 years. And ultimately, we decided it wasn't a book project, but when the opportunity came to do it as a shorter essay, it
Paid for an essay. It wasn't a book project because my friend Howard Middlemark, you bounced it. You were right to bounce the proposal. My friend Howard Middlemark, who had been a free man there, read it. He said, "Barry, you have this wrong. This isn't about Scott, it's about you." And if you've got to write it about you, and to the degree it is about you, Scott will get told. It got told. I don't know, I can't make a judgment on this essay. To me, it is severely flawed. It has a hesitant, difficult opening, and the structure is somehow subtly foul, so it doesn't pay off the way it should. But the most remarkable thing about this essay is, like Dr. Johnson's dancing, his female preacher, the most remarkable thing about the female preacher, like the dancing dog, is that it existed at all. Not how well it did, but that it existed. This is an essay which I believe could have been done better by a number of people. Evan Hunter, Larry Block, Donald E. Westlake, Lester Del Rey, Damon Knight, Philip Klass, Silverberg, who was not an employee but was so close to it, James Gerald Mundis, and I could go on. But they didn't. I don't know why. In some cases I can guess, in most I can't. They did not do it. I'm the bum who did. And I have that. Just as with Hell of Its World, Phil Klass said to me, "I'm glad this novel was done. I wanted to do it, and I didn't get around to it yet, but I'm glad somebody did it." I saw a letter from Phil Farmer to my late friend Ben Indick when Hell of It was published. "I read this novel, Barry's all wrong, I can get it right someday." Where is it, Phil? Hell of It was published in 1973. Phil died in what, 2000? He died in 91 in what, 2007, 2008. Where is it, Phil? He had 34 years. Where is it, Larry Block? Where is it, Westlake? They could have done it better, but I did. And you can take me down right now, but I got that essay done, and I got it on the record. This is a story which desperately needed to be told, and however poorly I told it. And as I said in the essay, as I had said to Gordon, trying to pitch a book, the story of the Scott Meredith Literary Agency, 1946 to 1993, is the story of the corruption and decay of American publishing from in those years, 46 through 93. They parallel exactly. And it's a heck of a story. And as, again I say, poor as it may have been, I got it done, and it will be the fundamental research exhibit for the real book which may be done someday, And in that sense, it will be indispensable. It is a very significant story.
Yeah, the Scott Meredith Literary Agency held down the low end of agenting in the publishing industry for decades. It was never the absolute worst. There were agents who were completely crooked, and Scott was not completely crooked. He made all sorts of deals. The complete contents of the magazines were written by 2 people under 8 pseudonyms. Okay, and he signed contracts for them. The entire publishing lines were written by people who sat in the Scott Meredith office and wrote story after story, book after book, under name after name. This was not a complete innovation in American publishing. The Strand Syndicate had done this in the 20s and 30s, etc. He was notably interested in getting his cut on everything, and he did. He even 20 years after a client would leave him, if they would have a bestseller, he would write him a letter and say, "You owe me a commission on this book. I'm still your agent. I have an irrevocable agreement." He never actually hired a lawyer to enforce this, but I remember him doing it even in the 70s when I was in Berkeley with some of his clients since the 50s. Main Street. Hardly anybody in publishing ever met him in person. Only the people who worked there saw him in person. Scott did not go out to publishing lunches very much at all. He did not go to publishing social events. He didn't even go to the bathroom by himself. Bob Silverberg told me that when Scott died, he called up another agent at the agency and said, "How will Sidney go to the bathroom?" Because the 2 brothers would always go together. Is this true?
Sid was dead.
Sid was dead.
Sid.
Oh,
No
then
longer
he
had a
called up
bathroom.
when Sid. Okay.
He no longer had a bathroom problem. When Sid died in July of '92.
Okay.
Scott on 2/11/90.
I see. Then I was mistaken in my order. Silverberg called up when Sid died and said, "How will Scott go to the bathroom?" Because since 1947, they have always risen from their desks and gone to the bathroom.
That is a foul rumor.
Really?
Sid's day off was Tuesday. And Scott was perfectly capable of going to the bathroom alone on Tuesday.
I see.
However, there was progress. Whether I was not in the booth, so I can't testify. But I can say that he pretended to go to the bathroom alone.
Life is better than we really know.
What was the brother doing at home? We don't know.
I don't know. No, I know that Tuesday Sid was out and Thursday Scott was out. For decades.
Yes. We all, of course, know that we are referring to Scott and not Sid. Or vice versa. That's one of the difficulties in this conversation. The business practices of the Meredith Agency were such that since the agent did not get a commission on a sale, the sale was more important than the amount of the sale. Do you understand? The agents, the Scott Meredith Agency, were more interested in making sales than making more money on sales because they didn't get any percentage of that. If they sold all the books, their performance was
So selling to a cheap market was as good as selling to a well-paying market.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or on the other hand, they would sell Anderson for, you know, $3,000 to a cheap market or $3,000 to an expensive market. It didn't matter to them. And they liked multiple book contracts. I mean, when I was in my first job at publishing, I said, why don't we do a 5-book contract with Poul Anderson? 5-book contract with Poul Anderson. I do a 5-book contract with Silverberg. 5-book contract with Silverberg. This was like selling yard goods. Okay, so, and the agents who were trained there were trained to sell the book. You know, I conclude the sale. So they paid a salary. And so it was that kind of productivity was the productivity we were aspiring to. And it wasn't until quite late in the game that Scott actually had some clients that he was able to sell for large amounts of money. And that was because the publishers came and waived large amounts of money as well as over the term. Norman Mailer was his client. Norman Mailer began to make significant money. Arthur Clarke was his client. Arthur Clarke began to make. There was a famous moment in which Scott actually went to lunch with Judy Lindell Ray and had his picture taken. This was the only picture I know of that Scott Meredith had published in lunch. Because Judy Lindell offered him $1 million for Arthur C. Clarke. Big deal. But Don Moss, Josh Bilmus, Curtis, Henry Morrison, and many, many others were trained at the Meredith. Ralph Vicinanza came. Many, many agents. And they and the people they trained all had son of Russell Galen, John Ted Stoltz, Chad Galen, Scott Meredith agents. Certain of the attitudes of the Meredith agency are to old literature like me still apparent in some of the other agents. Well, would you agree with that, Barry?
Well, I agree with some of it, and I disagree with other parts of it. And that we've been at this for 40 years. First, I want to say this before the panel dwindles away. This was a significant figure. We can tell Scott Meredith anecdotes and get laughs out of this audience and hollow laughs out of ourselves for certainly as long as we want. But this man, part of the significance of this story is that this man was an important agent, a brilliantly focused individual, and just as Murdoch, they now say, Murdoch poisoned England, and Murdoch poisoned the press all through the world, the English-speaking world, Scott infiltrated publishing. His attitudes, that's what I tried to get in my essay.
Yes.
Is that publishing as it evolved in the 47 years of his function was a mirror of Scott. And this man was no fool. This was a brilliantly accomplished man. And I quoted in my essay, looking at the coffin, I thought of what a famous quote in Time magazine given by Walt Disney near the end of his life, of what are you proudest, Mr. Disney? That I kept this goddamn thing together, he said. That I built this and I kept it together to the end. Which was an echo of a memo Scott wrote me in 1968. He said, I just want to keep this thing going like a big machine until I'm gone. Now that's not small, that's not a small thing. And to keep this thing going for 47 years, and to have the effect upon not only publishing, but upon writing, upon the culture, upon the way we perceived ourselves. To make that a mirror of Scott is no small accomplishment. What Mailer did was what was an outcome, was a consequence of being a client of Scott Meredith. The direction of Mailer's career was shaped by Scott. There were other careers, many. Hunter's career was shaped that way. Larry Block's, so much. Silverberg was Scott's creation, many writers. He saved my ass in 1965. He taught me how to sell. He taught me early and he taught me often and I was just bright enough not to have to be told twice. I would never have been a writer had it not been for stumbling into Scott Meredith on June 2nd, 1965. He was a significant figure who was at the center of publishing, and as I said, made publishing his mirror. And to understand what publishing became in those 47 years, you have to understand what he was, because he made that in a way synchronous with his interior. Having said all this, I haven't even touched the feet department, that miracle. Which is a whole...
What about the outline?
Plot skeleton.
Ah, the plot skeleton. On my deathbed, I could and undoubtedly will quote the plot skeleton in both long and short versions. I think I'll spare the audience. I can do it.
Yeah. I am told that it was originally drafted by Lester Del Rey.
That is probably true.
Okay.
That is probably true. And his book, Writing to Sell, published in 1946, and in several revisions, remained in print until 1997 or so, was probably written by Lester Del Rey. Not certainly, but probably.
So what was the plot skeleton?
Oh, no, it was simply the structural outline of a commercial story.
Do you want to hear it? Yeah. How many in the audience want to hear it?
Oh, well.
5 parts. Okay. 1, you begin matters with a sympathetic lead character with whom the reader can identify and from whose point of view the story is told, period. Immediately that lead is confronted by 2, a vitally important but insoluble problem which bears in on the protagonists, on central life and circumstance. In his attempts to solve that problem, the lead is confronted by 3, a series of rising complications which, based upon the successive dynamic of struggle and failure, drive the narrative forward to 4, a point of absolute crisis in which the lead solves the original problem or fails to solve the original problem at lasting consequence. But in either case, 5, a resolution emerges from these struggles which has a permanent effect upon the consequences of the protagonist's life. This is the 5-part plot skeleton which, as we and now you, the fee client, know, underlies over 95% of presently published fiction. However, there are 3 important variations, minor as they may be. 1 is the biter bit, so-called biter bit or reverse plot, in which an unsympathetic character proceeds through a series of increasingly nefarious acts and is undone by his own hand. 2, there is the delayed revelation or surprise ending story in which one piece of information vital to the reader's and protagonist's understanding of the situation is withheld until the end and then given as the quote kicker unquote. This kicker should astonish the reader and vault the reader into an entirely new perception of the preceding material of the work. And finally, there is the piece in the novel, applying to the novel, there is the picaresque or romana clay in which a highly individuated and sympathetic protagonist is followed through a series of interrelated but disparate episodes toward a final epiphany. Thank you all.
And of course, that is very general, but it's also generally true.
Yes, isn't that the horror of it?
Yeah. I'm reading the first chapter of the novel I've been working on for 20 years, and I'm appalled to discover that I went really out of my way to make the very first paragraph satisfy point 1 of the plot.
We're clients of Scott Meredith's grand agent. He's our grand agent, Joshua Billman's. And I was not shamelessly ask if you guys have any dirt on Joshua's time at the agency. Scott's relationship with Joshua that I can later use to needle him.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Scott was employed, Joshua was employed by Scott from May 28th, 1986 until my wife's birthday, October 21st, 1994. He was there for 8 years and 4 months. I saw him, in utero and in all stages since. Not particularly promising at the outset, somewhat more promising than I was at the outset, but a brilliant agent, evolved, learned, grew, and was certainly the grimmest, most dedicated, most passionate agent who ever worked for that agency. Not only in his period, which was synchronous with that of Russell Galen, the most famous recent offspring of the agency, but he was more dogged and dedicated than Galen. Very good, very good. I felt he was an infant pro man. You're an infant pro man for the first 3 weeks, and 90% of them were fired. 90% of new pro men did not last 3 weeks. If they did, they kind of hung on. It's remarkable how they hung on. You kind of got through the door after 3 weeks, and you could be amazingly corrupt and incompetent and last if Scott began to look upon you as his. Which is to say, if Scott began to look upon you as someone who knew too much, who you did not necessarily want running around in the world. Joshua was quite good. He was quite good. I felt early, by 87 or 88, I felt he would be successful. I couldn't judge the degree of success he would have. His success is astonishing, as we know. Just astonishing. All credit to him. Nothing like it. Galen included. Nothing. Moskowitz included. And that Henry Moskowitz became Morrison at Scott's behest, not at his own. This was Scott's idea. We do not, I have become Scott Meredith, and you're going to become Henry Morrison. This was an order, and
I totally agree.
Is that satisfying?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
By the way, just as an aside, in Mystery Scene in the last 6 months, Larry Locke has been writing a few columns about which are good. Margaret?
Can any of you speculate on how publishing would be different today without Scott?
Well, it's like how would American civilization be different if Franklin Delano Roosevelt had never been president? A lot different. A lot different. Different on a scale that we cannot.
I have two answers. One, that you would claim the auction, that you put out a book, just as hardcover publishers would put out books for paperback auction simultaneously to 10, 20, 30 publishers. Scott said, why should publishers have a courtesy that writers trying to sell novels don't? We can send out 10, 20, 30 copies on original offer. And that he claimed to have originated the multiple auction. Is it so? I don't know. Nobody's disputed it. That's the easy answer. But what Scott did was make corruption respectable. He gave corruption a good name. He made the regarding of literary material of any kind as meat hanging in a butcher shop respectable. You no longer had to apologize for it as a writer, as an editor, or as a publisher.
Yes.
It was no longer an object. You took on Jacqueline Suzanne or Harold Robbins, and you didn't have to say, well, we really want to publish Pynchon or Flann O'Brien here, but of course we have to pay the bills. No, Scott made it possible to say we're publishing Judith Krantz, and we love it. So there. and we'll publish as much. He made corruption respectable. And that probably was a good thing. He took the pretension out of the business. He took Maxwell Perkins, who was already in the grave, and threw several shovels on him, and that was good for everybody, including Maxwell, who was beginning to smell by 1965. Pretty much.
David?
It's such a central part of your essay, but it's still only kind of alluded to. Could you please explain for us exactly what fee reading is?
I don't want to hijack the panel, Felix. I didn't.
I understand.
There's somebody in fiction I referred to the drunken, wretched George O. Smith, may he rest in peace, coming on a panel, dead drunk and hijacking it. I'll
No, I was going to say, let me give a tiny, short explanation of fee reading and you can correct me. Okay? Scott Meredith put out that you could send him a manuscript and his fee reading service would read it and give you a thorough critique of it for money. Okay?
Wasn't it the Writer's Digest ad, little box ad, sell your book, was that it?
Let's see, from 51 through 68, 17 years, the back page of the Writer's Digest, full page.
Basically, and by doing this, your book, you would learn how to improve your book so it would sell. And there was the vague promise that it was good enough, the agency would take it on and sell it.
Not vague.
Was it a literal promise?
If.
Yes, if. And indeed, there were instances of this. However, the huge majority of such manuscripts were not good and did not sell, did not get taken on. But the Meredith Agency made money on reading. Now, this is a particular kind of quasi-corruption because the agent is not supposed to charge you for reading your manuscript. On the other hand, a fee reading service, which he had before he was an agent, is simply a fee reading service, and you're the customer. Okay?
You're paying for it.
In other words, what Scott did was to conflate client and customer. And it was in its own way a brilliant innovation. If you were a writer and weren't going to make him money by selling a book, you would at least make him money by paying him to read the manuscript, which would otherwise be considered unethical.
Isn't this just a variation of the send us your poetry and we'll turn it into a song?
Oh yeah. But it's like all of the good sources tell you, if an agent charges you a fee to read your manuscript, the agent is crooked. This is not what an agent does. Except that the Scott Meredith Agency had a fee reading agency that did it. A kind of quasi-separate business with employees, and Barry was famous as being one of the most, if not the most productive fee reader for the agency ever. Is that correct?
I was the Duke Snyder. His literary gifts, I had my epitaph 40 years ago. His literary gifts remain in dispute, but he was a wonderful typist. His body of work remains, that little of it that is known remains controversial, but he was the greatest fee man who ever lived. I don't think anyone would disagree. I was really good at this. As I wrote in the essay, like I came on the second day, like the man with the chicken, I discovered abilities within myself I did not know I had. I could not believe if ever a man was born for a job or a job, and I was the most productive, the most fluid, the most cynical, the most perceptive, and probably in certain positive ways the best. A lot of good. But this is the kind of job, and you can all make your parallels and similes with your, the better you are, the less you want to be. What can I say about this? As I wrote again in the essay, there were some successful writers and properties which came out of the Fleet Department. The most successful property might have been Harrison Hyde by John Faris. Richard S. Prager was a fee man, fee client. There were some pretty good writers. However, as I wrote, the more interesting aspect of the Fleet Department are the writers who send in fee scripts with fees and were either not taken on or who the agency could not sell. And a partial list of non-represented fee clients would include John Barth, Evan Connell Jr., Robert Parker, Dean R. Koontz, and the 19-year-old Stephen King. Guess who rejected the 19-year-old Stephen King? Everybody. I mean everybody in American letters either falls into one of these categories. Applied for work there, sent in was a fee client, sent in an inquiry. It includes everyone. It's a blanket thrown over the entirety of the American writing colony, without exception. And what this means, as I said, is that publishing in this country was completely refractory of Scott Meredith.
Yeah,
just as Murdoch, I felt during Son of Sam, which is so long ago that most of you don't know what I'm talking about. I felt in Son of Sam in 1977 that I was being pulled into the sewer of Murdoch's unconscious. We were all being driven insane by Murdoch, whose most famous headline during Son of Sam was, "No one is safe from Sam." After 47 years, we're all Berliners, we're all Scott Meredith, all of us. And that's not that again, that is no Smith.
I guess my favorite Murdoch headline was "Headless Body and Topless Bar." Paul?
You know, much of the work that you guys were doing could have been done from home. You could have done all your fee work from home, but what was the sense that it was like a colony or a plantation set up and there are these, what was the physical ambience like of working for Scott Meredith? Was it...
It's all in my essay.
Right, which I read and enjoyed, but I am blanking on those details, and that to me seems very evocative. Or was it endless rows of desks with these harried fee men sitting at them? And tell us a little bit about.
Yes, it was. There was a fee room at 845 Third Avenue with seven souls and a proofreader in one room. A very small room about the size of this days, and it was fetid.
How big were the whole facilities? I mean, were there rooms, offices for agents, and Scott's office?
It moved to 845 Third Avenue in 1977. That was fairly large. The office to which I came on June 2nd, 65, was in total maybe as large as this room, and had 20 employees, and very poor air conditioning.
Yeah. So very unprepossessing for such a nexus of power and influence. And
well, if you ever walked into Random House in the 50s or 60s, or candidate at Audio's office, none of it was very prepossessing. Or in our minds, these were gleaming towers. But you know, David, there was nothing particularly Windsor Castle-like about publishing.
Actually, there was one publishing office that I worked in the 60s. Random House, they rented the Archdiocese of New York building, which had gracious wood-paneled walls and that sort of thing. It was the first big publisher I ever visited. I went into Clifton Fadden's office. Now, Bennett Cerf's office with a friend who had gotten an appointment because his mother knew W.H. Auden. and we were asking him to support a literary magazine we were going to do at Columbia University, and he very graciously told us no. Nevertheless, he let us into his office. And I was overawed. I said, my God, does publishing look like this? And then, a year or so later, I visited Toby Roxburgh at his office at Walker and Company. And I said, no, publishing is not.
Can we talk a little bit about the reason why I volunteered to be on this panel? Because I have an anecdote that involves this.
Very useful.
I'm buying Michael here. Our second-hand anecdote involving the agency and Paul Williams, who was, of course, Philip K. Dick's literary executor, and the Meredith agency was Dick's agency. One thing that I volunteered to be on this panel because I know I would sit next to Ballard. The only thing I know about the Scott Meredith agency is that they kept excellent records. And because of that, we were able to date well after the fact the order that Phil Dick wrote his manuscripts. And the story is that when I began working with Paul with the Philip K. Dick Society, I was the database manager. Paul and I started corresponding. And I had this theory that the order of publication of the Dick novels clearly had to be unrepresentative. Specifically, I believed that Man in the High Castle, Martian Time Slip, and Dr. Blood Money had to have been written one after the other, even though in terms of publishing, there were like 5 other novels that intervened in that span. And it so happened, Paul had been planning to go, at some point, he was working on a book called Only Apparently Real, and he wanted to include in that book as an appendix the order that Phil had written everything they'd ever written, all the stories, all the novels, and he was planning to go to the Scott Meredith agency and look at their records, look to see if they had records of the receipt of all the manuscripts, because if they did, he could determine the order that Phil had written. And but it was kind of low on Paul's priority because he thought that he wasn't thinking that there might be some revelation in terms of an insight into Phil's work. And when he heard this theory about the ordering of these novels, and it made sense to Paul, he made a point to go to the agency. And I can remember being very excited. Paul sent me the results of that research in a letter. This is before the days of email. I remember, oh my goodness, this is it. This Paul sent me the results, and sure enough, I was correct about those 3 novels. I was also completely off base about some other things, like I thought Our Friends from Frolics 8 might have been an old manuscript. But so that's all I know about it. But the Meredith agency was Dick's agent, and he's the #1 writer in the field. And what can you say about the way they handled him as a client?
Well, Terry Carr said, when I was working there, I was assisting Henry Morrison, who was still here at the time. And I went into the filing cabinet one day, I was looking through the Phil Dick files, and I saw the manuscript for something called the Martian Time Slip. And it had been received the year before, and it hadn't been sent out yet. And I said, Henry, what about this? And Henry said, oh, that's where that is.
This explains a lot.
This was not typical.
No, the typical of the agency was things got set up and set up and set up and set up. There was big activity. They were, to me, in my first decade or so of publishing, they were ubiquitous. They had more clients than anybody else. Any young writer, damn near any young writer who applied of any talent at all, was accepted as a client immediately and put into the system, circulated. And in those days, there were lots of markets. There were lots of mass market publishers, lots of slots for science fiction, and a huge turnover in science fiction editors. Almost every year or two, the science fiction editor will turn over because people who enter science fiction editing want to get out as fast as possible in general, because it was the lowest paid and lowest status part of the publishing.
They tried to help to sell the 10 or 11 Main Street manuscripts of Dick's. They came very close. American the Giant in particular, that actually.
However, it didn't work. And then Paul and I ourselves in the 1970s tried very hard to sell conventions to the craft artists, and it was explained to us by 5 or 6 editors that we sent after it was turned back from the agency, that it was the first novel by a science fiction writer. That was such an uphill battle that they couldn't justify investing in it, even though one of them really wanted to, was turned down by his boss. That was boring and intricate. Okay.
Who lost the manuscript for Nicholas and Higgs? And was it
We don't
the
know.
Kilder on the Hill?
We don't
We don't know what happened to us.
It's possible that they got recycled into other novels.
From what we,
It's not possible to determine
Yeah.
exactly at that time. But finally, Paul and I just said, oh, well, we can do this ourselves. We published it, painted it up in my living room, drafting board, published it. And the rest is history. I still get sometimes as much as $20 a year film royalties from the French version of Confessions of a Therapist. Tiny percentage, nevertheless.
that's great.
He was trying desperately to get out of science fiction.
Yes, he was.
If those novels, if any of those novels had sold, he would have
made it.
made it.
Because some of them are considerably good novels.
But what those files disclose, and the records were remarkable and remarkably detailed. And facts such as Minority Report, movie rights were sold, and it was made, of course, Tom Cruise, for $1.8 million. Russell Galen sold it. That story, the green card on that story, it sold the Fantastic Universe. It was rejected by 10 to 15 markets. It sold for, what, penny a word, $76 in 1956. This to me is a fact so remarkable that it needs no further comment.
Yeah, we
Oh.
know what that.
Just quick, where are these records now since Meredith's passing?
They were dumped by the agency was bought in toto by Arthur Klebanoff. It took effect exactly 6 months after Scott's death, 8/11/93. He disposed of the green cards.
Oh, boy.
Did you not take them?
What?
Did you not take them?
I took a few and sent them to the right. I sent Silverberg his as a friendly gesture. But no, I did not feel I had any more right to use them. I sent Silverberg his own, and I sent Silverberg Cogswell's.
Okay,
Which
we're done.
I think are just very